Start recording again. All right. Well, I'm glad you guys had a chance to talk to each other. Denise, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah. So some of you will be familiar with this. We were thinking about what we wanted as our kind of agreements for the evening. And so we took the big ideas that we use with the teachers that we work with. So we've got these three kind of big bullets that we're thinking about. Teaching is a complex process and no one has it nailed. We're smarter together and we can always get better for our kids. And so this is kind of a mantra that we really keep with the teachers that we get to work with. So that's what we're going to be thinking about tonight, is how it's not really about getting all the answers tonight. I know you were hoping that would be the case, but we don't have all the answers. But it's maybe asking some of the right questions and what are some nuggets that we can kind of bring out to have conversations about.
One thing we know is that webinars go quick, so we're not going to go into depth on any of these different frameworks or ideas or the things that we do regarding innovation and engagement, but we wanted to give you kind of a quick overview, and then if you want to get deeper into it, you can contact us or you can dig into the resources that I'm going to share with you. So just to let you know what our intentions are. And right now it's really important to consider, how do we be innovative? We've actually been forced to be innovative while thinking about being equitable, and how can we inspire students from every facet of our district to want to engage online in particular, but also when they're in your classroom, like how can we think through this a little bit differently? Part of that involves some of Denise's brains with the 5 promises of a math class, and how to differentiate and really do some good culture responsive education with her 3-student protocol. And we do a lot of work with teachers online too with project-based learning, and we have some lesson planning and design cycles that we use quite a bit in our work. So we're going to briefly talk about all of these things tonight. That's kind of our agenda. So engagement is deepest in environments that support fostering relationships, productive instructional strategies, and social and emotional development. Engaged learners demonstrate stronger satisfaction with learning experiences, stronger achievement in courses, and increased graduation rates. Researchers identify 3 primary components of learner engagement for in-person and online settings, and that's behavioral, cognitive, and emotional engagement.
So one thing that for the work that we do with teachers, there are 2 pieces that we find to be really important. So when we talk about engagement, it's of course incredibly important for students to be engaged, and that's what we're trying to do. But I think the only way for that really to happen is if we have teachers who are also engaged, and that if we are pushing ourselves to learn new things. So if you look at some of these pictures here, we're just going to have to kind of think about what you're seeing and what you're noticing. I'm going to draw your attention down here to the bottom right. Jess, you see yourself right there. I'm sure you're noticing that. But we really try to have opportunities for teachers to create and try things and experience, even if it's not something you're going to use directly in your classroom, although very often people want to anyway. But it's okay to also feed ourselves and to grow as teachers and as people, and that's what gets us kind of excited. So we try to make sure that when we are working with teachers, we give them a chance to try things hands-on just for themselves to become more efficacious we work specifically around STEM, but it would be really anything that would look like. So this picture on the bottom right, for example, is a backpack challenge that we did downtown at UCD, and they had to make a backpack with a very short period of time. And it was just one of those kind of design experiences for teachers to kind of think through, like, what would it be like for students? And I will tell you, lots of the teachers ended up using that in their classroom also with students. Sherry, you want to talk a little bit about some of those other pictures?
Yeah, these are obviously students being engaged in mostly project-based learning, but there's all kinds of ways that you can be innovative in a classroom But there are ways you can do this, this innovation remotely as well, especially the idea of project-based learning. Um, they don't always have to be in the classroom to build. So just considering what may lie ahead for all of us, we need to think outside the box a little bit, but innovate within the box, as George Couros would say. And some examples, one of my middle school teachers just did a PBL with her 7th graders, and they had to design a creature who is adapted to the place they live. So it even became kind of a place-based learning example. You can see how they use their environment around them. There were a lot of different pictures. One student actually even used a sleeping bag to represent a cave. So they were pretty creative. So these are going to be available to you to look at in the resources doc as well.
So we're going to take a minute and we are going to ground ourselves in a little bit of reading. So our folks, once again, who we work with are going to be familiar with this text. And one thing that I love about a good text is that when you revisit it, it brings out different things to you. And I think particularly for those of you that have already read what you're about to read, you might want to really switch your mindset a little bit to what about now? Like, how am I engaging in this now? So there is this innovator's mantra that, how do they get to it, Sherry? It's just,
I'm gonna put this whole slide into the chat room, so the link should work. Otherwise, I'm gonna pull this mantra up myself and just put the prompt in the chat.
so what we're going to have you do is you're going to read each of these statements, and you're just going to kind of give yourself a little bit of a score for yourself. A 3 would mean that is totally me. I believe that. I do it all the time. A 2 would mean that is a good idea, but I don't really do it that often. A 1 is something that, oh, I never thought about that, but I like it. And the question mark is maybe a pushback. It's okay to not agree with everything that you see. So a 3 is something you're doing all the time. So I could picture during this remote time, things that used to be 3 for you might be more of a 2 now. Like, yeah, I know that's a good thing to do, but I'm not really doing it because I don't know how to do it in this remote setting. So maybe think about it both ways, like who am I like inside my heart as a teacher, but also what is coming out in this new remote learning a little bit, right? So one more time, just real quick. So that 3 is I do it, I do it, I do it, I love it. A 2 is I want to do it more. I know it's good, but I don't always do it. A 1 is it's something brand new. It's a new thought, but you like it. And then a question mark is always kind of, well, I don't know. We'll see. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put you into groups again, and you are going to take a minute and just kind of read, give each other a little bit of time. And then we're going to ask you to share with each other one of your 3s. So something you feel like that's just at my core and I do it all the time. And then either a 2 or a 1 that is striking you, and just allow yourselves to kind of go around. I think the groups were about 3. Mine was 3. So you should have time to go around and share something that is all about you and something you either are wanting to add or you want to do more of. Hopefully that makes sense. And
If you have questions,
can open it.
If you have any questions, though, just put them in the chat room for now, and we'll help you. Especially if I lose you some, if I have some technical issues. It's our first time.
Mostly all back? I think so.
Like it.
So we were going to do a quick whip around. So be thinking one person in your group. I know Mark from our group is going to be sharing in a minute. So just sharing a little nugget of something that struck you in your group conversation. Maybe we should leave it in the, like not sharing your screen so we can see everybody.
Okay. There we are.
All right, so I think we're mostly here. So who's group 1? I don't know. That's okay. I know we were group 2. I just happen to know.
We were group 1, and I think Jessica's going to share.
Oh, great.
Okay, thanks.
All right. So we just kind of had a discussion about how like innovation is definitely at our core, and kind of the quote of something that came up in our group was that, you know, what's good enough for today or yesterday may not be good enough for tomorrow, that we are always trying to innovate and always trying to come up with new things. And how for a lot of us, like what we really connect to is those personal relationships with kids, and that it's been nice having already built those personal relationship with kids going into this remote learning. But one thing that makes us really nervous, or that we don't really know what to do with, is how would we start a year and kind of build those personal connections and those relationships remotely. What would that look like, and how do we build those connections that really help us be innovative educators and positive educators with those connections? And then a couple things that we discussed was that through innovation, we have been able to find some ways to continue that connection, that thing that is really important to us, with whether it's sources of strength activities that we've turned into Schoology discussions, like tell me one of these activities you did this week that has nothing to do with math, that's just what you're doing to take care of yourself, and what's that going like for you, and us as teachers being vulnerable and sharing that out. Or whether it's things that used to be potluck dinners that are now webinar sessions, and times to just find a connection in a different way. So thinking through how, with that innovation at our core, how can we continue PBLs, or maybe start PBLs and build that interest and that connection without the physical space? It's kind of like the one part that we are worrying about.
Great. All right. Mark, how about you?
Okay, we talked a lot about innovation a little bit too, and we all kind of agreed, if we're going through the scales, that was a 3 for all of us, as being kind of, we felt we're all kind of innovative with what we're trying to do, and always trying to learn and adjust to what we do with the students we had in class. And example I brought up is, even if I had 2 or 3 of the same class, I would teach differently one style in one class, and then switch to another style in another class based off the types of students I'd have in class.
That's true.
And that was a little different for some of my colleagues to understand. How could you do that as quickly as you did? And it's not, as you said, it's about the relationships and knowing the students you have, as previously said, with the students you had in class. So we kind of were on the same mantra, the 3 of us, with some of that, with some innovation things. And as we're going on, things to work on is to keep up in what we're doing. And I like what the group 1 said about how would you start the year out, because that is actually a question I wrote down. How would people start the year out? And also know, because I already know some teachers are already thinking that's what they're going to have to start the year out. How are you going to be able to build those relationships with your students in the fall? And this summer I got to work with some teachers, and I got to try to talk to them. How are they going to try to do that if they happen to be remotely? And this is in Colorado necessarily, but different states. So
Yeah.
All right. Who's next? I think there's 2 other groups, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ruth and I were in group 3. And as we were going through the list, we kind of realized that by necessity, we've kind of become 3 in a lot of those pieces. The one glaring piece that kind of stood out for us, and I think for everyone on this chat right now, is we know a really powerful part of our thinking learning process is our reflection time, where that's individual reflection time, but also reflecting with others, and how difficult that is to do on the phone or on a Zoom call or a Teams meeting. There's just so much value in being with somebody and kind of batting around those ideas and reflecting on your practices. And so that's kind of the part that's missing for us. And because we've been moving so fast, maybe we haven't missed it yet. But I think when we get through the end of this year, the challenge is that we're going to have to all, almost on our own, kind of process all of this. So if we do open the year like this next year, we're able to move forward with more dynamic lessons.
Great. Who's next?
Do you want to go, Nicole? We did not follow the directions and choose.
That's okay. What do you bring?
We talked a lot about, I think it was that third one about being an innovative teacher, but doing what's best for kids and for families. And we talked a lot about, and Kelly said this, like, learning is messy. One of mine and actually Ruth's teammates sends out like one of the things we send out as a first grade team are like innovation challenges. And this week the challenge was to build something that was helpful in this time. And I was telling Nicole and Kelly that one of the girls in my class built something super helpful. She used an old pair of pajama pants that didn't fit anymore, and the like the plastic part of a flip-flop to make a holder for her water bottle because they're going on so many walks and her water bottle was getting sweaty. So she like filmed this whole video of her like explaining how it works and what it was made of. She's like, and the pajama pants were too small, they don't fit anymore, but they were cute. So she wanted to reuse them. So her mom helped her like sew up the bottom. But that it's been just really cool to see what students are doing in this time and how they're continuing to want to build things and create things and design things. So yeah.
Great.
That's great.
Well, thanks all for sharing.
Yeah. I'm going to go back and share the screen if I can find it. All right, so for a few minutes, we're just going to jump into some of those things that were on our agenda. And then we're going to allow you guys some time at the end to come back in and give us some ideas and share your questions. This first slide is something that we did for sister schools, but it's around equity in the sense of how can you get every student to engage in phenomenon in a way that they want to actually learn the stuff. And so one of the things that NGSS does is really push this idea of phenomenon. And I have a picture there which links to a video of all of the hurricanes from 2018. And the idea is to start the unit of study, which in this case would be a weather unit, with a QFT, which is a question formulation technique. There's other protocols you can use, but it's really important to think about how can I get kids to actually tell me what they already know, but what questions do they really want to have answered? And so their first thinking here would be watching it several times and seeing the patterns, generating some questions, and then share that out with their group. These two things, the first thinking and new thinking, really engages students cognitively, but also emotionally in what they're about to learn, but also with other people in their class. So it's really a nice way to introduce a unit of study. It doesn't have to be a weather phenomena. It could be anything in any subject. So, you know, even a text or a poem or, you know, an advertisement, whatever it is that's kind of related to the unit of study, that you can start your unit off that way. What's cool then is if you take all their questions, their group questions, put them on an anchor chart, and then those questions are answered along the way, just to really get them to have a little more ownership of their learning that way too, and obviously want to learn more about it. So that's one thing we had tried. And again, I'm not going to go in great detail, but all these things you can look at later in the resources doc.
So this graphic is talking about kind of promises that we make to our students. So as a student, I should know that these are promises for me. And this is what I know in my classroom. So one thing I've been working with my teachers on is like, so how does this live? If I know this is really good, how does this live remotely? So the idea is, if I take our example of doing, reading the mantra, right? So the think on my own, we had a chance to read on our own. If you had the text in front of you, you might've been able to kind of write it up a little bit, but you were allowed to see like, what does my brain tell me when nobody tells me what to think? having a chance to think with someone else. So after we had that, we talked to each other, we shared ideas. And so in my group, for example, it was very much like Rhonda would say something and Mark was like, oh yeah, I agree with that. And then I'm thinking this as well. So how important that is. Time to make some meaning. So time for us all to come back together, which we did, where we found out what other groups were talking about. So it's interesting. And now that I've already thought and I've shared, I'm kind of interested in what that other group has to say. If we try to just do automatic, raise your hand, tell me what you're thinking, as a kid, I might be like, well, I haven't even thought anything yet. So like, I'm completely out of this conversation. So it's this idea that I have all that. Holding my thinking is that place where we capture that. So with my students, like, how are we going to capture that? Are we going to have a scientific notebook? Are we going to have a journal? Are we going to have a math composition book? Whatever that is, like, where are we going to capture this? And then that idea of, can I reflect on how I got smarter? So when Ryan was just talking about the importance of reflection for us, every bit as important for our students. And so these are these 5 promises of math class, which I would argue really are true for any classroom, but this came about from working in math classrooms and being a mathematics instructor. So like, that's really where it landed. But I can't imagine a classroom where this wouldn't make sense, where you wouldn't want kids to think on their own. So I think this is one of those pieces when we think remotely now. If I have this little thing sitting next to me, I can ask myself that question: how am I going to get them to think on their own? Like, what is that going to look like? And then I ask myself that every time I'm bringing kids together, because this is promises for every day. So if that's a promise, I'm going to think about that. My promise is not what's the warm up. My promise is not what's the homework. There might be those things, but that's not a promise, right? It might make sense to, oh, now I'll go do something else. But this piece is that structure, that routine of how kids really engage, and what would that look like in a remote setting? How can I make that come alive? So the equity piece, when we think about planning with students in mind, we have a protocol that we use with teachers that is literally having students in mind. So we have teachers come in at the beginning, and after they've kind of met their students, and they create this 3-student kind of a map. So will you switch to the next one, Chair?
Yep.
So I'm not going to go into detail on my 3 students, but these are my 3. So my angel is my person that I'm just kind of worried about mathematically for whatever reason. Julio is my student who, things seem to mainly work for him. And then Joanna is my student that maybe could use a push, that seems to be kind of like always right on the edge of ready to move on to the next thing. And so what we do is we start out by filling this little chart in that part that says what I know. Like, what do I know about each of these kids? And so if I know my students deeply, I'm going to be able to answer that question. If I don't, that lets me know, you know what? I don't know enough about Angel. I don't know why things are like they are. So I want to do that. And then usually what we do is we have them do some kind of experience, a task or a text or whatever. And then after our teachers do that, we have them go back to this chart and say, okay, so what would Angel do when she got this task or text? What would Julio do? What would Joanna do? Like, what are their student moves? And then we anticipate, so what's my teacher move going to be? So I feel like in remote, it's a very similar thing. I can still go back to my 3 students. Now, it might be interesting because they might change locations in a remote setting. It could be that my Angel, who kind of in the classroom, it was not always working perfectly, she's actually more on fire in the remote, right? Who knows? Like, that could be something different. But what can I anticipate? What will Angel need from me? If I'm not hearing from her, and I know that's one thing that teachers are experiencing, what can I do? Like, what does she need from me to want to engage? Like, even if it's just that human connection, that it's not even about the content. So that's kind of one thing that we do with our teachers, that's that equitable piece of how am I actually keeping real students in my mind? How am I being responsive? Like you were saying, Mark, like you're being responsive to each class. Every class is the same. My response isn't always going to be the same. So that's this idea of this 3-student protocol.
One thing that we're definitely really feel is innovative is project-based learning. And we do a lot of trainings in our district, and Kelly Kinsella, who's also participant tonight, works with us a lot in this area. But I've included some links to some examples and some examples from PBL works itself. But if you just look at the 7 project-based teacher practices, you start with, you're building a culture first. So when we think about remote learning, how do you build a culture remotely where students are doing the work, they're doing relevant, you know, learning that involves real problems that they care about, and then thinking through, like, how do you plan for that? How do you engage and coach along the way, and of course align those to standards. Thinking about each of those 3 students, how am I scaffolding, how am I assessing? And then the 7 essential project design elements are also part of the planning project. And one thing that we've really tried to push with our teachers is that last innovation of the public product. So if I have students make something or create a solution to a problem, whether it's a policy or whatever, who are they going to communicate that to? And it shouldn't always be, you know, just me as the teacher. So remotely you can think of, you know, who could I bring in as experts for a Zoom meeting? Who can they get feedback from online, face to face with an expert? There are ways that you can incorporate those things, sustaining that inquiry all the way through the project. And the last thing, well, it's not the last thing, but close. There's all kinds of ways to design lessons, but there sure are some really good research-based models that really effectively engage students in thinking and doing and creating, and definitely leads to more rigorous classroom situation. In science a lot, we have used the 5 E's. NGSS is now kind of transforming into storylines and 5 routines instead. So that's something new that we're gonna have to figure out this year. But it's all based in phenomenon. And as you can see, you know, the idea is you start with engaging and letting them explore and ask questions and figure some stuff out before the teacher comes in and here's the answer, here's explaining. And of course,
and one thing that's really important.
Mhm.
So this is best practice, right? So what you're looking at is what we know is best practice in the classroom. And I think what's really important to remember is that if it's best practice anywhere, right? So I don't want to transform like, oh, I do all these innovative things. And I think probably the challenge of remote learning has been particularly difficult for you innovative teachers who are trying to do innovative things, and to not get yourself caught up in like, you know what, I'm just going to have to do a video of myself doing math in front of you because that's the best way, because I can't think of anything else. And that doesn't fit well with our beliefs. And so if we know that this is what's best for kids, then we ask ourselves those reflection questions of, okay, so if I know what's best for kids is for them to have some kind of phenomenon to engage with, I have some kind of first thinking, how can I do that? What can that look like? If it's really important for kids to have discourse and talk about things, how can I make that happen? How can I use, you know, these, I'm just thinking tonight, like these breakout rooms. How could I maybe engage that somehow? Could kids do that on their own time, but they're assigned, you're this group of 3 or 4 for the whole semester, these are your people. And so you're going to go to them and you're going to record conversations you have that I'm going to get to look at as a teacher or whatever that is. But I'm not having to say, okay, I need to now plan my remote instruction. I need to plan instruction, right? And I need to take what I know is best practice and figure out. So that's why I can say, like, we don't have all the answers because the answers aren't all out there. But I think we have the questions.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like if we take these really good best practice pieces and we ask ourselves, how can they engage? How can they explore? How can they explain? Same idea with how can they use their 5 promises? How can I think about the launch cycle? How can I use engineering design? How can I make sure those pieces exist and live in the setting that we're in?
Yeah. The idea is not to get rid of things that work and just think differently. So at this point, I'm going to get out of speaker mode and sorry, there. Oh, this is the last slide, but that's not what we want yet. Okay, and I'm going to try to do, I apologize, everyone. what I'm going to have you guys start doing is, if you can see the chat feature, and I'm getting there. Then if you could raise your hand, or if you can just unmute yourself, and if you could just take some time, let's just have a discussion right now about some of the things that you heard. I would also think that you can contribute to this conversation with some ideas as well. So if you can do that, I'll work on getting the screen different.
So one thing that I saw, and this is actually Jessica Edwards, who's in here, that I thought was just a cool example of what Sherry was talking about with an authentic audience, like who could be an audience other than me. One of the groups of her kiddos who were doing this Be the Change project that she's been working on with them all year in her statistics class, I was not sure they were going to get it together, but they did. They created this presentation for all of the high school and middle school social studies coordinators, because they are interested in getting an African American studies course implemented in their school. And they shared that presentation, and then they got feedback from different coordinators that looked at it, and it was really like, the feedback was cool, and they were able to then see what these coordinators thought about their idea. So they still figured out a way to present that wasn't in person, so that it kept them kind of engaged in the project, because they still were going to have that level of, you know, if I know I'm going to have to show it to somebody that's not just my teacher, it's like a healthy anxiety, I like to call it. And I think, you know, they still did it, which I thought was really cool.
I think one thing I can add to that is that the students figured it out themselves, but what they did was they created a Google Slides presentation, and then they did a voiceover of the four of them adding to it, so that they didn't all have to do it at the same time, or they didn't all have to make the social studies meeting, because some of them knew that they weren't going to be available at that day or time. So they were able to just do a voiceover of their presentation and not be present at the actual presentation, and then they were able to get the feedback through comments and another Google form that was sent back to them. So that was one way that they figured out to work around the different time and schedule issues, which I was proud of them for doing.
Any other
Any
questions?
thoughts, questions?
I like the reinforcement of best practices or best practices, and always keep those in mind in what you're doing. You don't have to keep in mind what you know is best practices as you go going forward, which was kind of what I suppose I needed that mental reset going into the summer with what I'm going to try to convince people, so they don't have to panic as much if they know work on the best practices. It kind of took a few notes to make sure I remembered. Being a little older, I needed to write things down to keep my head straight. So,
Mary, do you want to say something?
I just wanted to remind us all to ask the children for their ideas, because they often have excellent ideas. Excuse me. And they have more experience sometimes with this than we do. Excuse me.
Bless you.
I don't have the virus.
Well, you're distant anyway, so.
I have allergies.
Well, cool. One last thing before we go, I wanted to show you guys this. We have a virtual conference throughout the summer. So if you're interested in this conference, it's going to be on these dates, and we're going to do small group work in between the sessions. But it's really about, you know, if you're a leader in the school, even as a PLC team member, what are ways that we can actually be reflective and thoughtfully plan for the next year? So you would leave really with some ideas on, and you know, various tools on how we might do this well next year. Just wanted to pass that along. And thank you all for being here today.
Absolutely. It was our first foray into a webinar, so thanks for
Yeah,
Thank
thanks for being
you.
patient.
thanks for your patience.
And Rachel, this is Rhonda Naylor, and I want to say, I remember when you were pregnant, and I just saw your daughter walk in, and that is
Yep.
so cool. How old is she? How old is
I have a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old.
Wonderful.
That's cool.
Congratulations.
To say thank you, Sherry and Denise, for putting this together and presenting tonight. It was really informative and helpful, and I really appreciate you doing that.
Thanks, Roberta.
Again, thanks for your
Thank
patience.
you.
Yes, thank you, girl.
Clunkiness.
Thanks, you guys.
Are
Oh,
any,
how fun to see her. How fun.
are
Oh.
any of these going to be archived?